Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. Good morning from Nigeria. Thank you for being part of the webinar. And wherever you're joining in from, I also want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. This webinar is going to be on reasonable accommodations, and it's going to be for not just students with disabilities, but struggling typical learners. So whatever strategies we're going to be talking about here can be implemented for both students with disabilities and their typical peers. All right. I'm going to start off with my slides. So if you can see the slide, please let me know about it. All right. Good. All right then. Like I said, providing reasonable accommodation for struggling learners. I'm going to show you my outline. Great. I'm going to start off with an introduction. I'll tell you a bit of about myself and jump into what reasonable accommodations are. Then we'll talk about the approaches to reasonable accommodations. And then we'll mention some types of reasonable accommodations that you can implement in your classrooms. And then we'll do a very quick recap about everything we've talked about. And we'll conclude and we end the webinar. Okay, let's go. Good. Now, this is me. My name is Farouk Hassan. I am the lead advisor for the Inclusive Support Hub Africa. I am very passionate about helping educators design learning experiences for their students with disabilities. And I've been strategically involved in teacher trainings, IEP designs, and also mentoring educators and special educators in working well with their students with disabilities. I am also the convener of the Learning Mentors community. This is a community of passionate educators as well that are very much interested and aware of special education and the impact of it to their students with disabilities. And the Learning Mentors community is of two types. We have the Facebook group, which you're currently in right now, and also the WhatsApp group. The WhatsApp group has various groups within it, depending on the interest of the educator. Okay, good. Now, before we jump into what reasonable accommodations are, I'm going to give you a background of why this webinar. All right. Now, right in front of you is the SDGs. That is the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the SDG is a collection of 17 goals that countries in the world came together and they hope to achieve these goals before the year 2030. Now, starting from SDG 1, which is no poverty, down to SDG 17, partnership for the goals. Now, each and every one of us, we have a stake in this goal. We are collectively trying to achieve it one way or another. However, for us as educators, we are more particular with goal number 4, which is quality education. Now, the SDG 4 wants to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for every child. This means that every child before the year 2030, irrespective of their gender, their age, their race, their religion, their abilities, should enjoy inclusive and equitable quality education, meaning they should be included, their interest, their strengths should be included, and they should have accessible engagement with the learning teaching process. And also, while they are moving from one step of their education to another, they should have lifelong learning. It should be continuous. Okay, that is what this SDG is trying to achieve. Now, for us as educators, we sometimes have the challenge of trying to understand how our learners demonstrate their understanding of what they've been taught in the classroom, and which is one of the biggest challenges that we educators have. And that is why, in order to overcome these challenges, we have what we call the accommodations, reasonable accommodations. Now, what this means is that we are meant to provide teaching learning process in a least restrictive environment, meaning there shouldn't be barrier to how a child understand what they've been taught and also demonstrate their understanding. I'm going to give you an illustration about what accommodation is. Okay. Now let's imagine you're trying to reach something at the top of the shelf. You're not tall enough to reach that thing at the top of the shelf. Now, what you're trying to reach at the top of the shelf is your goal. It's a goal that is there. You want to reach that thing. And while you're trying to reach that thing, while you're struggling to reach that thing, someone observes this and realizes that you need an aid to reach that thing. And then that person provides a stool that you climb on and reach for that thing at the top of the shelf. Now, in the context of education, that person trying to reach that thing at the top of the shelf is the student. And that thing at the top of the shelf is the goal they're trying to reach, their academic goal, their social goal, their emotional goal. That is what it is. And then the person that provides that aid for them is you and I, educators. And then that stool that the student climbs on is the accommodation, the reasonable accommodation. I hope that little illustration gives you an idea of what accommodation is. Accommodation is not the same. It depends on the need of the student. Okay, I want you to put that at the back of your mind. Great. Now let's start up. What is reasonable accommodation? Reasonable accommodation refers to changes or modifications or adjustments that you provide to the instruction model, to the classroom, to the content, and to the delivery of your lessons in the classroom. It allows individuals to showcase what they have been taught and understand it better. Now, I want you to also understand that reasonable accommodation is not just for students, it's for every person with disability. However, since we're going to be talking about the context of education, we're going to be talking as well of reasonable accommodation within classroom environment. Good. Like I said, reasonable accommodation is modifications, adjustment, changes to contents, to instruction, to delivery to ensure that every student with disability or every struggling learner get access to education, quality education, and also demonstrate their understanding without barrier and within a least restrictive environment. Good. Now let's look at some approaches to reasonable accommodations. These approaches are like elements that when you fix them or when you place these elements within your classroom, you inevitably provide reasonable accommodations. Okay, good. There are so many of them, but we're going to look at a few of these approaches. Good. Now let's start off with individualized education plan, which is also referred to as IEP. Now, the IEP is a document that outlines the strengths, the goal, and the accommodation of students with disabilities. It outlines them in such a way that any person that wants to look at the IEP or that is looking at the IEP will understand what the diagnosis of the child is, what you're doing to ensure that that child is getting the best. Okay. Now, before you design an IEP, a special educator would have carried out an assessment to understand what the diagnosis of the child is. Now, after you've after the special educator has done the assessment, the results is now out, you know what that child needs, you know the diagnosis of the child, you now design the IEP. Now, when you're designing the IEP is designed by a team called the IEP team. The IEP team the IEP team comprises of the students themselves, special educator, the general educator, the administrative staff of the school, and all professional stakeholders that are involved in the development of the child. And also the parents of that child needs to be part of the IEP because they have more uh, they have more involvement with the child. Good. So when you now draw out the IEP, the contents of the IEP definitely will have accommodations, what that child needs to thrive in the classroom. sorry, the accommodation might be in form of extended time, preferential seating arrangement, assistive technology, flexible assessment methods. Could be anything, but it depends on the need of the child and what the special educator that carried out the assessment has observed. Good. So when you implement an IEP, you're going to be providing accommodation. All right. Good. Now let's look at the next approach, which is the UDL, also known as the Universal Design for Learning. Now the UDL is a teaching framework that ensures that every child, irrespective of their abilities or disability, is included in the classroom. Now, the UDA has three key principles. First, we have the multiple means of expression, multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement. All right, so I'm going to explain all of this means to you. The multiple means of expression means that how is the child showcasing what they've been taught? It shouldn't be one way, it should be multiple means, it should be different means according to the strength of that child, according to the need of that child. It could be multiple means in form of project, in form of presentation, in form of individual work. It could be multiple means. It doesn't have to be a specific mean of expression, it's a specific mean of demonstrating their understanding, different ways according to the need of that child. The next one is the multiple means of representation. How are you delivering these instructional materials to them? Is it in a paper form? Is it in an audio form? Is it in a visual form? It should be different depending on the need of the child. Good. The next one is the multiple means of engagement. How are your students engaging in your classroom? How are they showing interest in what you're teaching them? Are they doing it in form of group work? Is it a project that you gave them, which can also serve as group work anyway? Is it an individual work? How are they showing interest? By the time you apply the UDL in your classroom, you also provide accommodations, because that way every child with their own need is being cared for. Everyone is being represented. Everyone has a means of expression. Everyone has a means of representation. Everyone has a means of engagement. That is UDL. Simply put. Okay, good. The next one is assistive technology. This is straightforward. Assistive technology has to do with in the learning of the child in using technology. There are various forms of assistive technology. Now, also, like I always been mentioning, depending on the need of that child, the assistive technology helps you to integrate these tools in your classroom. It could be using screen readers, screen magnifiers. It could be using audio recorders, assistive, so that they can be able to perform well in the classroom and be part of the class. Now, also remember, it depends on the need of your students with disability or your struggling learner. Good. The next one is differentiated instruction. Now, I am very aware that educators differentiate their instruction. Whatever way you teach Femi shouldn't be the same way you teach Ngozi, or the same way you teach Ahmed. It's different ways. Now, this is because every student is a different form of entity. Every student learns individually. So their learning styles are different. Their pattern of learning is different. How are you differentiating your instruction? Now, when you differentiate your instruction in the classroom, you're also providing accommodation for your students. That is what it means. So how this person is learning is different from how the next person is learning. All right. So by the time you implement it, you're also providing reasonable accommodation. Good. Next one is flexible assessment methods. Now, the reality we have here in Nigeria is that our assessment methods are paper form assessment. Assessment on paper, students have to fill in their answers and all of that. Now, it doesn't have to always be paper assessment. It can be verbal assessments, it could be presentations, it could be projects. By the time you provide different types of flexible means of assessment methods for your students, it reduces anxiety, and that way their needs are being met. you will agree with me that paper form assessments are usually very structured, and it creates lots of anxiety for your students, especially students with disability. If you can provide verbal means of assessment, you ask the child a question, the child responds to you, gives you what you want, that child is good to go. It doesn't have to be written form. The child doesn't have to write anything. Again, depending on the need of that child, it could be presentation. They could teach them how to use slides to present a topic. It could be projects, different means of assessment. And when you assess them, you grade them, everything is fine. Good. Now, you also agree with me that assessment is always used to test the knowledge of that child. Whatever means they show you that they understand what you've been taught or what they've been taught is still a perfect way to grade them. It doesn't always have to be paper form assessment. Be flexible with your assessment methods. Good. Now we're going to look at collaboration and communication. This means that whatever you do as a general educator, let the special educator be aware of it. Let the admin staff of the school be aware of it. Let their parents be aware of it. Let the students in question be aware of it. Let them understand the form of accommodation that is provided to them. That way they show more interest in their own learning. They are responsible for their own learning. All right. And also, it means that whenever you go for the IEP meeting, for example, with the parents, the special educator, the admin staff, everyone is on the same page. You, as the general educator, should not know something that every other person doesn't know. You should be on the same page. Communicate it with that person. That way, you're consistent, you understand each other, and everyone is carried along. Collaboration and communication is very important in providing reasonable accommodation for your students. All right. Now let's look at types of reasonable accommodations. Now, while we were talking about the approaches, I also mentioned some types of reasonable accommodations. Now, I'm going to look at different forms of reasonable accommodations, and then you can now decide to pick a specific type of reasonable accommodation that is readily available to you within your own environment. You do not have to break the bank to go and provide accommodations. Whatever is within the school's resources, you provide it. Good. The first one we're going to talk about is the extended time. Now, I love this type of reasonable accommodation so much because it's the most inexpensive form of reasonable accommodation. You don't need to spend anything to provide extended time. Extended time works in a way that you provide a specific percentage of the allotted time to the student in question. Now, let's take, for example, you're assessing the child or you're assessing the student in a particular subject, and the allotted time for the assessment is an hour. If every other typical student is given an hour, a student with disability or a struggling learner should be given at least 10% of that allotted time. That means if you're providing 60 minutes, 10% will be 6 minutes extra time. Now, depending on the need, depending on the severity of the condition as well, it could be 6 minutes, it could be 12 minutes, it could be 18 minutes, it could be 9 minutes, depending on, but at least 10% of the allotted time. That way, that child is effective in demonstrating their understanding, their knowledge of the topic or the topics in question. Extended time is a very easy and inexpensive form of reasonable accommodation. 10 minutes of extra time will do a lot for a student with disability, will do a lot for a struggling learner in your classroom. Good. Preferential seating arrangement. Now, this is usually for students with hearing impairments, visual impairments, or students with attention deficit and hyperactive disorder, to allow you keep an extra eye on them and to allow the students in question, especially students with sensory disabilities like hearing impairment and visual impairment, to be in front of the teaching process. That way, whatever assistive technology they are using is also within the proximity of the teacher, and they get to understand it better. And also for students with ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactive disorder, it gives you a chance to always keep them in check. You're always prompting them, helping them focus. For example, if the student with ADHD is also using assistive technology like a noise cancelling headphone, while they're on task, you see them going off task, you can easily prompt them to go back. That's why we use the preferential sitting arrangement. Good. The next type, okay, these are different sitting arrangements within classrooms. It depends on how you want to make it flexible. Now, what I once did was every term, I find a way to rearrange my own classroom while I'm working with a student. I rearrange the classroom and ensure that everyone is seated in a spot that I can keep an extra eye on them. Then those students with disabilities or those students that need additional support, I keep them closer with me. Now, students always want to be close to their friends, all right? And sometimes while they're close to their friends, they can be disruptive in the classroom. And this is also an opportunity for you to also disrupt their disruptiveness. Okay, good. These are different forms of sitting arrangements, and depending on how it works for you, you can arrange it and make it work for you. All right. Assistive technology. Now, this is straightforward as well. There are different forms of assistive technology. There are screen readers, there are braille displays, there are hearing aids, there are braille keyboards, there are also braille keyboard covers. There are different forms. There are speech to text softwares. There are various forms, there are various apps as well that can serve as assistive technology for your students. Now, one very interesting interactive website that I always use is called Quizzes. It is a very interesting interactive website. It allows you to deliver your classes. It allows you to deliver assessments. You don't have to always be there with the students while you're delivering all of this. You can be somewhere else. As soon as the students start up their assessment or their classes, you get a notification, and then you follow up with what they are doing. It's very interactive quizzes. You should try it out. Now I'm going to show you. Okay, good. These are various types of assistive technology. The first one, the top left, is apps that you can use. The top right is a braille keyboard. The bottom left is a wheelchair. This wheelchair is usually used by students with physical disability, cerebral palsy, spinal bifida. They use this a lot. And then the bottom right are hearing aids, usually used by students with hearing impairment. Now, the hearing aid that a student will use will also depend on the severity of their hearing impairment. And also the brand, the type, the price range depends on all of that. There are invisible hearing aids that will go deep into the ear canal. There are some that it goes above the ear. Depends on the severity of the hearing impairment. Good. These are also types of assistive technology. Also, we have the braille keyboard, sorry. We have the screen magnifier, we have the wheelchair, and then the bottom right is a braille display. It allows visually impaired students to navigate desktop contents. So it reads it back to them, and it shows the pointers, and they can use their fingers to feel it and understand what is on the screen. There are different types as well, depending on price range and what the student requires for their learning. Good. Now, note taking support. Now, this goes hand in hand with a scribe or a reader support. Note taking support is usually to provide easy notes for students that are unable to copy the notes while they're in the classroom, like students with dyslexia, for example. You can also give them their own classmates' notes if they are unable to copy it while the class is ongoing. You can give them their own classmates' notes, and they read it, they copy their notes, and it goes well. So note taking support is a type of accommodation you can provide to students in your classroom. Now, alternative formats. These are providing large print materials for students with visual impairment, braille notebooks for visual students with visual impairment, audio recording, digital text, different forms of alternative format. It doesn't have to be normal text fonts or text size that you provide. Looking at the need of that student, you can provide alternative formats for them in the classroom. Good. And these are examples of alternative formats. The first one is a braille notepad. The middle one are alternative and augmentative communication formats. The AAC is divided into two. They have the unaided and the aided. The unaided has to do with it doesn't need electricity or battery to run. For example, we have the PECs, we have the sign language. Those are unaided. The aided ones are now those that require electricity to work. Example of that can also be braille displays as well. It needs electricity or batteries to run. That's why it's called aided. Then the last one there are audio recorders, usually used by students with visual impairment, so that while the teacher is teaching in the classroom, they can place their audio recorders in front of the class while they get all the information from the teacher while he or she is teaching, and then they can take it back home and listen to it instead of staying in the classroom and copying their notes. They can listen to it and also convert it into braille notebooks. Good. Now, like I mentioned, scribe and reader support, it goes hand in hand with note-taking support. A scribe is a person that helps a student in copying their notes in the classroom. Now, the scribe support it's of various types. There's the partial scribing, there's the full scribing. Partial is when you're not doing everything for the child. The child can still write what they want to write, but when it comes to a particular content, you help them in writing it. And the full scribing is when you are doing everything for them. Good. Now it depends again on the need of that child. Reader support is reading the text content for a student, especially for a student with dyslexia, or a student that has visual impairment or that has motor impairments that they can't write, they can't read or write for themselves. A reader support helps them do that. Another example of a reader support is the screen reader. It comes in the form of apps, softwares. Download it into your system and use it to read the content of the desktop or the laptop, usually used again by visual impaired students. Now, modified assessment. Also, I mentioned this earlier on when I was talking about flexible assessment methods. The modified assessment means that you don't have to use a specific form of assessment all the time. Modify it according and depending to the need of that student. They can be verbal assessments, written assessment as well. It can be project assessment, it can be presentation. It doesn't have to be a specific one. Different forms of assessment, modifying it according to the need of that student. Class modifications. Now, this is another type of modification. This is another type of reasonable accommodation that you provide in your classroom. Some students require accessibility within the classroom because they are students with physical impairment. They are wheelchair-bound students, so they need easy movement within the classroom. Now, if your school hall does not have ramps, for example, how do you expect the students to come into the classroom? So you need to modify it. Now, class accommodations usually starts from the architecture of that school, the onset of the building of that structure. That way, everything goes hand in hand. So class accommodations are used for students with physical impairment or students that need noise reduction headphones, for example, like students with ADHD, and also students that need adjustable furnitures. Those are forms of class accommodations. Now, these are examples of ramps. You can start not just for the benefit of students. It's also the benefit of key stakeholders that want to come into your school. What now happens when a parent with physical impairment is coming to the school and there are no ramps for them to move around with their wheelchair? How do you expect them to stop by the gates and don't come into the school? I mean, that is why ramps are very useful within the school environment. It helps accessibility as well. Now, communication supports. These are for mostly students with sensory disabilities like hearing impairment and visual impairment. Example of this form of reasonable accommodations are like visual aids, sign language interpreters, tactile signage, captioning. For example, while you're watching this video, you can see the caption at the bottom of the screen. These are forms of communication support to allow individuals that prefer reading the caption to understand what they're watching, to also get the knowledge of what they're watching. So it's very useful because not everyone not everyone can listen to what is happening, what they're watching. They rather read it. Good. Now, these are example of communication supports. The first one are tactile pavements for visually impaired students. While they are walking with their cane, they can navigate it and know the direction in which they are going to. While they're navigating anywhere that the cane touches and it doesn't have the tactile pavement, they know they are off course. So it's usually they walk on the tactile pavements. The top right is hearing aids, also for students with hearing impairment. And then the bottom right is an example of captioning for your videos and presentations. Good. Now, behavioral support. These are for students with emotional and behavioral disorders. You draw out or design an individual behavior plan for them, teach them social skills, teach them social skills, yes, and help them understand how to regulate self-regulation. That's what I was trying to remember. Self-regulation. Teach them to regulate their emotions, regulate their behavior. Teach them the ABC of behavior, which is the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. This is another topic for another day. Let's just understand that that is what behavior support entails. It's usually for students with emotional and behavior disorder. Okay, now let's do a quick recap. I'm going to quickly run through what we've done so far and help you refresh your memory. Good. Now, understand again that reasonable accommodation is all about ensuring equal access for students with disabilities and their struggling typical peers. It's not just for students, but we're talking about education context. We're using the classroom as the context here. Reasonable accommodation is for ensuring equal access for students with disabilities and their typical peer. An IEP is a personalized plan developed collaboratively with special education professionals, teachers, parents, and the student. All of these are stakeholders in the IEP team. You can't have an IEP team without any of them. They have to be there. Also, you need other professional stakeholders that have a stake in the development of that child. It could be physiotherapists, dietitians, any professional that is involved with that child needs to be part of the IEP team because their input will be fixed in the IEP. And also their accommodation, whatever they suggest as accommodation, will also be put into consideration. Good. The UDL, like I mentioned, is focuses on designing instructional materials and methods that cater to the diverse needs of all learners, including those with disabilities. The UDL has key principles: multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of engagement. Good. Assistive technology involves integrating tools and software into the classroom to support students with disabilities. Example are screen readers, speech-to-text softwares, screen magnifiers, noise cancelling headphones. All these are technologies. Differentiated instruction involves providing alternative materials and pathways for students to demonstrate their understanding according to their learning styles, according to their learning patterns. Whatever you teach Ahmed is different from how you teach Ngozi and also how you teach Femi. Different ways, okay? Because every child learns individually. Good. Teachers should also consider flexible assessment methods that accommodate the diverse needs of their students. It doesn't always have to be paper assessments, project assessment, presentation assessment, even dramatization. It could be anywhere. It helps them to reduce the level of anxiety and perform at their own functioning. Great. Also, like I mentioned, collaboration and communication plays a very vital role in implementing reasonable accommodation. Whatever one person in the IEP team knows, every other stakeholder within the IEP team should know it so that everyone can be carried along. Good. Finally, the concluding part. Now, when you understand that implementing reasonable accommodations is essential, you inevitably also create an inclusive and supportive learning environment for your students. Now, when you include the flexible assessment methods, you include the differentiated instruction, you include the UDL, you include assistive technology, you implement IEPs, and then you're collaborating and communicating with all of your stakeholders, you can now provide suitable reasonable accommodations for all of your students. Example of the reasonable accommodations that were mentioned so far, we have extended time, we have preferential seating arrangements, we have communication support, different depending on the needs of your students. Okay. All right then. Good. So we've come to the end of the webinar. I hope you've understood one thing or the other. I will go down to the comment section to answer some of your questions. And also, while if you need to communicate with me, you can also do that here. That's my email address. My phone number is also written there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for creating the time to be part of the webinar. I appreciate your being part of this, and I hope that the webinar contents are interesting enough for you to understand and also for you to help in achieving the SDG 4. Thank you so much. I'll be down by the comment section to answer your questions. And also, my email address is there, my phone number is there. You can also reach out to ask questions and for us to collaborate and work together. Thank you very much. Have a great day.